Hi, I'm author Stephen McGee, and I wrote the book Health Forensics and Hypoxia, Mental Illness, and Chronic Fatigue. That's me. I'm standing on top of the world's largest telescopes at the top of Mauna Kea in Hawaii. That's the W.M. Keck Observatory I'm standing on, and I'm at the observatory complex that is atop Mauna Kea. And we're here to talk about toxic altitude, and again, that's me, that's the Keck Observatory and the Subaru telescope. So got a nice day on top of Mauna Kea in this picture. So we're going to talk about this subject today, known worker illnesses, and we're on page 79 of toxic altitude. So this is an interesting subject, and what we're actually talking about with known worker illnesses is the long-term health effects of altitude sickness in high and very high altitude commuters, as that's what these people are doing. They are commuting generally from near sea level all the way up to mountain peaks, to the telescope complexes, and some of them are doing it on a daily basis. Others may actually be living at the complex and maybe commuting up and down on a weekly basis. So it tends to be the night shift workers that do the weekly commute and live on the mountain. The day shift generally commutes daily to the mountain. And so what we're talking about here is the illnesses that come out of mal-acclimatization. So these people are not acclimatized to the mountains that they're working on. So they just go straight up, they do their jobs, and they come straight down. And in some cases, they're taking drugs to do their job. They're taking medical oxygen, which is a prescription drug, and they're also taking over-the-counter medications to try and offset the health symptoms of malacclimatization that's coming out of altitude sickness. So we're going to talk about the various health issues these lifestyles of malacclimatization do to workers, and we're going to start in a place called La Palma. For those who are not familiar with La Palma, it's in the Canary Islands, and the Canary Islands are governed by Spain, and it's off the coast of Africa. So if you kind of go west from the Sahara Desert in Africa out into the ocean, you'll come across the Canary Islands, and the furthest west island is La Palma. So what's going on at the observatories in La Palma? So we've got some very interesting stuff going on in the La Palma observatories. So we've got a male computer programmer changed gender to female. Okay, so it's a little bit weird. So what's even weirder is this one. Second male computer programmer changed gender to female. Same thing. He was believed to be doing the same job as the first. So we got two people doing the same job, both change gender. So we'll go into gender issues a little bit later. It's a feature of high altitude astronomy. Okay, we got a retired computer programmer, so same job, computer programmer, developed cancer and had to have leg amputated. Oh, that is just so nasty. Okay. She was regularly going up the mountain summit as an astronomy tour guide in her retirement years. So I know this lady. She's very pleasant. It's very sad to actually see that happen to her. Electronics engineer is believed to have died from neck cancer. So I know this guy well. I used to work with him. He trained me. Again, he's a nice guy. So what's the next one? Electronics engineer. So same job. So I shared an office with this guy. So electronics engineer developed gastrointestinal issues causing fecal urgency. So for those of you that don't understand what fecal urgency is, I've actually experienced this. It is super nasty. And it led to me having a colonoscopy, and they removed a polyp from my colon. So that seemed to clear it up. So it seemed that mine was coming out of a polyp in my colon. So I had the same thing. Fecal urgency is you have to poop, and you have to poop right now. It doesn't matter whether there's a bathroom around or not, you just have to poop. And if you can't get to a bathroom, you're going to poop your pants. It's super nasty, and it's painful. It's a very painful condition, fecal urgency. So he had to travel with a roll of toilet paper. He was not isolated from the workforce, even though the staff believed he had picked up an intestinal parasite. It is unknown for sure what was causing the gastrointestinal problems, what the treatment was, and if it completely cleared up. So the belief in the staff and about this person was he had an intestinal parasite. So what the staff was not discussing is that altitude sickness is known to cause gastrointestinal issues. So did this guy have an intestinal parasite, or did he have high altitude induced gastrointestinal issues that were showing up as fecal urgency? So there's a little bit of a mystery as to what the actual root cause of this condition was, and I've never been able to find out what the root cause of this condition was. I have no name of a parasite. The staff was saying he had a parasite, but this parasite had no name, so I have no idea what was going on with this staff member, whether it was a parasite or whether it was an altitude-related disease or something else. So it's a bit of a mystery, that particular one. So staff member dies in car crash. So I can elaborate a little bit on this story because I had something similar after I worked in astronomy. So after I worked in astronomy, I started falling asleep in my car because I had sleep apnea. So sleep apnea is a known feature of altitude sickness. So this guy was found dead in a crashed car. No witnesses, from what I can tell. He was just there, dead in his car, which had gone out of control and crashed. So I do wonder whether maybe he had altitude sickness that had brought on sleep apnea and he was falling asleep in his car when he was driving, maybe. He's dead. He's not going to come back and tell us a story, so we will never know. So Chile observatory worker died in motorcycle crash. He had previously been an observatory director in La Palma. Okay, so this guy, same thing, dies in a crash. So does this guy have sleep apnea and he's falling asleep while he's driving? Who knows? He's dead. He's not going to tell us. So the other thing that goes on with these people is they develop memory issues. So the long-term effects of altitude sickness and memory issues. That's why this book is here. So this is hypoxia, mental illness, and chronic fatigue. So mental illness and chronic fatigue are features of hypoxic illnesses, of which altitude sickness is a hypoxic illness. So the other thing that could be going on with these people that are dying in their car crashes is they've got memory issues, and they're perhaps not fully aware of what is going on around them. And once you've got memory issues, you become more prone to having accidents. So it may be accidents coming out of memory issues in these people, but they're not around. They're not going to tell us their story, so we will never know for sure. So a visiting male astronomer died while summit working from the sudden onset of illness. So this guy's up at high altitude, summit working, gets sick, gets evacuated to a hospital and dies. So that's what happened to that person. Okay, young female support astronomer died after sudden onset of illness. So it's the same thing as the previous person. So this is a worker at the observatory who's working night shifts, dies after a sudden onset of illness. So very much the same thing that came before. So this is a feature of high altitude working. So there's a lot of people go to high altitudes, get suddenly sick, get evacuated off the mountain and die. It's not unusual at high altitude for this to happen. So here's me. Interesting. I slowly developed physical and mental illness during working at the Isaac Newton telescope. So that's where my office was. It's a telescope at the top of La Palma called the Isaac Newton Telescope. My office was in there. It significantly subsided after leaving. So that kind of tells you it's some form of sick building syndrome. My sickness was known to the management team as I took sick time for it. So yeah, my last weeks at this observatory were spent being sick at home with mental and physical sickness. Interesting. And it cleared up after I left. So that's also very interesting. So what I actually found out in the years afterwards is this particular telescope, Isaac Newton Telescope, it was in service as a cell phone tower. And today cell phone towers are known for their toxicity for people to the point of inducing cancer into them. So it's not too surprising that I would develop physical and mental illness in a building that is in service as a cell phone tower. And it's also believed to be in service as a Faraday cage. So there's some smoking guns as to what the sick building syndrome was at the Isaac Newton Telescope. So I personally wouldn't work at the Isaac Newton Telescope, having researched it. It's a very unusual building, and it looks very unusual when you look at it from the outside. Okay, so it is likely more staff should be on this list, but I do not know their medical histories. I've only kept in touch with a few people from this facility. So it's important to realize that this list should actually be significantly longer, probably. And it's just I don't have the knowledge to make that much longer list. The management team probably could make a much longer list of people than what's here. Okay, so we're going to Hawaii. So who doesn't want to go to Hawaii? Very, very beautiful part of the world. I've spent a lot of time in Hawaii. I always enjoy my time there. It was a reason to go to Hawaii. So I got a job at the world's largest telescopes. There I am, standing on top of the world's largest telescopes. And that is the world's largest telescope right there. So that's me. So some strange stuff is going on at the world's largest telescopes in Hawaii. So we're going to go through it. So there's a sickness that is known to the management team. They call it summit brain. And it's treated with medical oxygen and over-the-counter medications. That's the treatment the management team tells the staff to do, and it's completely wrong. The actual treatment is to descend to a lower altitude where the summit brain subsides. You don't want to be treating summit brain with medical oxygen and drugs long term. It's going to cause a lot of problems in people, and it may well lead you into hypoxia, mental illness, and chronic fatigue. Okay, so what's going on with the world's largest telescopes in Hawaii at the WMKEC Observatory? So, summit lead dies from colon cancer. He had an addiction to taking the company-supplied medications. He was training staff to take the company-supplied medications and use of an intermittent medical oxygen when they developed summit brain. He was not a licensed doctor, as far as I'm aware. So this is a guy, as far as I'm aware, he's just an ordinary worker, has no medical qualifications. He certainly doesn't appear to be a licensed doctor. So this is the guy that's training everybody how to treat their summit brain with oxygen, which in the USA is a controlled prescription drug. So nobody's got prescriptions for these oxygen treatments they're doing for the summit brain. So summit brain is a medical condition known to the management team. And they're treating this medical condition with medical oxygen that nobody has a prescription for. And they're also telling them to take over-the-counter medications, which long-term use is known to make people sick. So I'm not surprised this guy dies from colon cancer, because he had an addiction to taking intestinal medications. So it's reasonable to think long-term use of intestinal medications is going to give you colon cancer. So let's go on to the next one. So the female assistant to the summit lead. So this is this guy's assistant. Dies from heart disease shortly after he dies. These people died within, I think it was maybe like a few years of each other. And they had started at the facility around the same time. And they were both based on the mountain. So they were always up at high, I should say, very high altitude. So the sickness is much worse at very high altitude. So these two people, both two of the longest workers in the facility, both die about the same time. So she dies from heart disease shortly after he dies. They were two of the longest summit workers in the company. So, very nice lady. I do know that she was having negative interactions with the management team. She used to talk to me about it. So she said, well, let's just leave it as negative interactions. Okay. Male software engineer apparently found dead in the airport. So I know this guy. I was very good friends with him. Very nice guy. Goes to the airport to get his plane. Dies in his seat in the airport. So my understanding is this guy was found dead while waiting for an airplane. So it's like sudden onset of death. Mechanic commits suicide. So most people think, well, that's not too unusual, but you know, it is unusual when you realize that high altitude sickness. And this is very high altitude sickness, so we're actually a step above high altitude sickness. Very high altitude sickness this guy has. Suicide and high altitudes are linked. And the higher the altitude is, the more common suicide becomes. So this guy, I know him, had a young family, very nice guy, kills himself. Now, when I worked with him, he wasn't suicidal. I had no... This came to me as a great surprise when I heard he committed suicide, because I saw no indications of it when I worked with him. He was a very nice guy. So I would put that down to the long-term effects of altitude sickness, probably. It's kind of what's going on with this guy. Plus the combination of incorrectly treating summit brain with medical oxygen and over-the-counter medication. So pretty much everybody on the summit is doing that because they're trained to do that. Okay, female observing support assistant develops a nasty form of breast cancer. Yeah, that's it's pretty sad. Nice lady, I trained her, and yeah, she kind of took over from me, and when I left, she kind of got my position. So, yeah, she went on to develop a nasty form of breast cancer. Yeah, I found that so sad because of her age. She was like super young. So we're not talking like just your average breast cancer. This was like some kind of highly unusual breast cancer she developed. So this is a lady experiencing night shift work, extreme night shift work. The night shift starts before sunset and it finishes after sunrise. She's working at very high altitudes on top of the mountain, and she is probably doing what everybody else is doing up there. She's probably taking the oxygen, she's probably taking the over-the-counter drugs, she's probably struggling with night shift work disorder, which is a medical condition, and you know, she goes on to develop breast cancer. So when you actually look at the environment and the lifestyle that goes on in that environment, that's not that unusual. I'm certainly aware of other workers that have developed breast cancer in high altitude astronomy. Okay, so we're going to go on to the next one. Female observing support assistant develops irritability, sleeping on the job, and has eye surgery. So, yeah, kind of, she's having eye issues so much that she needs to have surgery to correct them. She's sleeping, she's having a hard job staying awake, so she's a night shift worker, like this one. And she's getting irritable with people. So she was like one of the people on the night shifts that people would tend to avoid because her personality was off because of all this. So she's not doing well. And the reason, in part, why she's not doing well is she's at very high altitude. She's probably doing what the summit leader is training everybody to do. She's probably taking the oxygen, she's probably taking the drugs, and she's probably taking other drugs of her own to try and stay awake during the night. I mean, I was certainly doing that when I was doing it, so we don't know for sure exactly what kind of lifestyle she was leading on the summit, but we do know the summit lifestyle is highly toxic for the night shift workers. So it's not too surprising to see that she's getting irritable, she's sleeping on the job and has eye surgery, because I can tell you I got so fatigued when I was on the night shift. The second half of the night is just, it's an absolute nightmare, the second half of the night on top of Mauna Kea, because all you want to do is you want to go to bed. Yeah, I've never really understood why they don't do a split night shift up there with an early night shift worker and a late night shift worker that changes at midnight. But, you know, they want these workers doing extreme night shifts on the top of Mauna Kea. And they're also sleeping, these two are sleeping at 9,200 feet. So they go up there, they live there at 9,200 feet for about a week. If the shift gets extended, they may be there for 2 weeks. So there's been many times I've had to stay up there for like almost 2 weeks because somebody's called in sick, and there's not enough people to cover sickness. So all they do is they extend your night shift, even though they know you're sick, and you have to stay up there, and you get super sick on double night shifts. Okay, so not too surprising that these two ladies are having issues. Okay, how about this one? Female observing, it's the same job. So we're in the third, observing support assistant. Okay, female observing support assistant develops gender dysphoria and leaves. Well, guess what? I know this girl very well. So I trained her. So yeah, I worked with her for maybe 1-2 years. She didn't last long. She didn't last long in the job at all. But by the time she left, she went from liking guys to liking girls. I understand that switching may have kind of been a plague for her. She was certainly very gender confused when I knew her by the time she left, and it wasn't there when she started. So something happened to her to cause gender dysphoria. Nice lady. Long-term male observing support assistant is well known to the team for his unusual personality. People generally avoid interacting with him. So this is a guy that has worked all over the astronomy field. He's like done a lot of different things in the astronomy field, and he hasn't just worked at this Keck facility, he's worked at other facilities. So I actually like him. He has an unusual personality, but I like him. Certainly had a lot of interesting conversations with him over the years. But it is well known that he has an unusual personality. He's doing night shifts, so all these four are all doing night shifts on the mountain. And you can see it's bringing out some conditions in them which are unusual. Okay, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 night shift workers. Here's our 5th night shift worker. So that's me. So let's see what happened with me. I developed chronic fatigue and a variety of mental and physical illnesses during working extreme night shifts at very high altitude. I was using company-supplied medications, intermittent medical oxygen, my own sleeping tablets, and caffeine tablets to do my job. So, night shift worker makes me so sick that I have to leave. What's not mentioned there is I also developed a tumor in my knee, and that had to be removed. So, you've seen a feature of maybe like tumors in this list? So, yeah, so I'm on the tumor list. So I had to have a tumor removed. And that seemed to trigger harassment of me in the company right before I left. So, yeah, you don't want to have a tumor removed in this company because they don't treat you well afterwards. There should be far more staff on this list, but I do not know their stories as I did not keep in touch with them. Okay, so like the previous list, this list should probably be much longer. So this is just my knowledge. So the people who got a much better knowledge of the management team. And I'd be surprised if they're ever going to tell you what's going on with their staff. Okay, so Arizona. So this is Kitt Peak in Arizona. So what Kitt Peak is known for is it's a very large complex of telescopes. I think there's maybe like 26 telescopes on top of Kitt Peak. So I was working at 2 of them, and I was working for Columbia University, followed by Dartmouth College, and let's see what's going on with these people. These people, I struggle when I talk about these people because they did actually sponsor me for my green card for exceptional ability. So I have them to thank for my USA citizenship. So I struggle as to whether I should tell the story or whether I should be maybe like loyal to them and stay silent. But you know, I think because there's billions and billions of dollars currently pouring into astronomy to build the world's largest telescopes in the north and the south, we do need to actually be honest with people about what's going on in astronomy before they build those facilities. And I am opposed to billions of dollars going into a toxic field that's inducing sickness into people. So that's my personal stance. So we're going to go through this. This is all about honesty in astronomy. So we're being honest about astronomy. Arizona. A prior observatory director was having issues with the management team and staff. He left. Well, guess who got his position? Me. So this guy is having issues with the management team and staff. Exactly the same thing happened with me. Okay. Observatory manager had a stroke and was left with a variety of health issues afterwards. So this guy was unusual. He had an unusual personality. But I didn't get along particularly well with him, and I knew, because of my personal medical training, which came from the Red Cross, working in a hospital for about 13 years, and St. John's Ambulance, and plus some workplace training courses, I knew that this was kind of characteristic of a stroke. So, you know, kind of my interactions were based with him, based on the fact that he'd had a stroke. So he had some lingering issues that were coming out of the stroke. But let's talk about strokes and high altitude sickness. So at high altitude, you're hypoxic. So one of the features of hypoxia is the blood thickens. And thickened blood is a feature of strokes. So strokes are caused by blood clots, and that generally comes out of thickened blood. So I'm not too surprised this guy had a stroke. Okay. So all 4 staff at the summit facility had problems that were known to the management team. The additional telescope contractor was also reporting health issues when working at the facility. The Dartmouth College Human Resources Department visited the facility to see what was going on. I left due to the board of directors not effectively dealing with these issues. I had been quietly troubleshooting the facility for sick building syndrome during my last year there, so I didn't tell anybody. By the time I started troubleshooting this facility for sick building syndrome, I was pretty sick, and I was yo-yoing constantly in and out of the doctor's office with that sickness. So that's what prompted me to start looking at sick building syndrome at this facility. And I never reached any conclusions because I didn't have the training to reach the conclusions at the time. So it was beyond my knowledge, this sick building syndrome, but I did find some issues years later when I revisited it with much better knowledge on the subject. So there was definitely some issues causing sick building syndrome though. So I do not know how the team went on after I left. I did not keep in touch with them. I did discover some suspected sources of the sick building syndrome after I left and notified the company of this afterwards through a job application to them. I do not know if they took any efforts to understand the sick building syndrome, and I did offer to return to this company to help troubleshoot it. They declined my offer as I was never interviewed for the position, so they know about it. And they didn't ask me what my knowledge was on the subject, and nor did they invite me back to troubleshoot the facility for sick building syndrome. So I don't know what they did, and my knowledge of what they did is nothing. That's my knowledge of what they did. So until they inform me that they did actually do something, my knowledge on the subject is they did nothing. So that's my personal knowledge on sick building syndrome at the Kitt Peak Observatory in Arizona. So I suspect the observatory only has 2 summit staff now, Only one of them appears to be from the original summit team of 4 I was in. So I'm not sure whether there's been any deaths at this facility. I would be interested if these people who are working at a facility that's been reported as having sick building syndrome actually went on to die. So I don't know. I don't know what's going on at this facility, but all I know is that some of the staff have disappeared out of this facility that were there when I worked there. Here you go. Deaths in the summit staff are currently unknown to me. So that covers what we just spoke about. So to wrap up, the illnesses in high altitude professional astronomy are generally a mixture of long-term altitude sickness and workplace toxicity. So my conclusion is this sick building syndrome is prevalent in the field, and it comes from the chemicals they're working with, the toxic exposures they're getting, electromagnetic fields, stuff, strange things that are going on. These mountaintops have very high radiation levels, so you'll get radiation sickness on these mountaintops. And it's just this toxic mix of nasty exposures going on in high altitude astronomy. And I've never been on a training course for high altitude sickness in high altitude astronomy, so that they don't train the staff on high altitude sickness and what it can do and what the long-term known effects are. So just be aware if you're supporting billion-dollar telescopes getting built in the north and south of the world, you are supporting this ongoing workplace toxicity of professional astronomy. So that is toxic altitude. You want to find more on the subject, hypoxia, mental illness and chronic fatigue, discusses the long-term health effects. And Health Forensics was written when I actually didn't really understand the long-term health effects of toxic altitude exposures. So that's an interesting read to see what I was looking into prior to realizing that I'd been made sick from these toxic altitude exposures that led me into hypoxia, mental illness, and chronic fatigue. So please like the video, please subscribe to the channel, and I wish you the very best of health. Thank you.